So that brings us to the topic of today, which is something that I actually thought about a lot. There's like a lot of like converging topics around let me take a step back. So spiritual Bitcoin, the divine technology of abundance and truth. So I wanted to explore how the journey of exploring Bitcoin can actually serve as a spiritual tool for spiritual growth, but also for manifestation and wealth creation and manifesting money, because it's kind of all tied together. And there's a couple of parts that have been like floating around in my head that are kind of all coming together. So hopefully the flow makes sense. But back in, I don't know, in February or so, when we were really starting to explore Bitcoin, something that I had written down, or a thought that I had that I kind of started to explore, was this idea that that the shift in thinking into Bitcoin actually started to shift my brain into one of abundance, where I'd been doing a lot of manifestation work, like with To Be Magnetic and other spiritual manifestation practices. And it's like really around this idea of like, you really want to create an abundant mindset in order to manifest pretty much anything that you want in your life. And I started to notice that just thinking just the journey of like discovering Bitcoin and what it is and what it means and what the implications are of that sort of was this like ultimate abundance tool. I think one thing that I am hearing from you guys is that you had to like have the faith or like step into the abundance mindset before like going towards Bitcoin. But this presentation is actually going to be kind of a little bit about the opposite, about how the process of researching Bitcoin, understanding all of the implications for your lives personally, for society, for our country, et cetera, that sort of process of discovery is sort of a spiritual journey. And by spiritual, I don't mean religious at all. What I mean is that it's like a spiritual growth. Like you are having your own spiritual journey in some way, right? And that is like you discovering what you're, instead of saying spiritual growth, we could just say like discovering what you're here to do on earth, why you think you're here, what you want to do with your life, things like that. And so I think that and how you want to lead your life, what values you have, what kind of character you want to have, like those are all part of spiritual growth. So Bitcoin is like just seen as money, right? Or code or very technical things. But in adopting Bitcoin, that it's more than money, because it's sort of training your nervous system, but training your nervous system for having personal responsibility, sovereignty over your money, thinking more abundantly in order to adopt it or to hold it. And then also that it's a couple of different people have mentioned that it's a moral technology. And like, what does that mean? Bitcoin's not a religion, but it functions as a moral technology, that Bitcoin is our solution to morality in some ways, with financial morality, because it anchors us right in truth, because we know, once you know about Bitcoin, right, it's really anchoring into the truth. Like there's only one truth there's no lying, like everything is out in the open. And then it's also sort of an energetic vehicle, because it does take some energetic belief as well to trust that it's there, because it's invisible. You don't actually see the Bitcoin, right? You trust that it is kind of like we trust that digital money is in our bank account a little bit. But when we do adopt sort of that energetic vehicle of Bitcoin, it's creating very tangible wealth. So it's basically representing this complete paradigm shift from how we think about exchanging our value, how we think about our own wealth, and it's basically, it is sort of this spiritual initiation path, because you're starting to think differently about how you interact with your money, because you are moving from things like the bank holds my money and I trust that it's there, to I hold my money and I trust that it's there. I trust myself. I don't trust some external person. You're also taking more risk, or and you need to find your own conviction, your own faith in order to stay steadfast. And it takes discipline, because you see a lot of people who say, oh, Bitcoin's not for me, it's risky, it's, I lost so much money. That's because they lack the discipline. They lack the discipline to hold, to stand towards their conviction. So if you're interested, there's a couple, and that just sort of like goes on the surface, but there are a couple of really interesting posts here that go a little bit more into the mythology of like ancient Egyptian mythology. This one specifically says that Bitcoin is designed to force humanity to reconnect with its highest essence of the self through a spiritual initiation process of collecting the 14 scattered pieces of its lost divinity. But when they say that, they're saying essentially like those 14, the 14 pieces, right? Those are things like your authenticity, your morality, your authenticity, things like that. And another one that I really like, this guy, Seb Bunny, he was actually on a podcast. Actually, we're going to see, I have a clip from his podcast actually. But he gave a really interesting discussion recently on a podcast about the psychology of money in Bitcoin. And he had written last year, actually, this spiritual perspective on Bitcoin, which his TLDR is Bitcoin increases our capacity to align with our authentic selves. And how do you do that? Because it encourages the expansive thinking. It encourages thinking long-term for future generations. It allows us the time and the space and the mental capacity to align with our authentic selves rather than what society has asked us to do. Because there's only a limited cap, that means that there's deflation, which means your purchasing power increases always. So when your purchasing power increases always, you're able to think more long-term, right? So now you can actually go inwards and ask, who am I? What motivates me? How do I want to show up in this world? When you learn about Bitcoin, you're like, wait, this whole system has basically been preventing anyone from even having the time to think about what they want in this world. And so that's, yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons that Bitcoin is spiritual. So Bitcoin is rooted in truth. like a little bit hard to explain, right? But you have the current system, fiat currency, which, is basically just faith in the US government, right? You trust the government and the central banks when they have not been proven trustworthy. We don't know what the truth is. We don't know what's actually in the banks. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes at all. We have no idea. They literally manipulate the money. Like, that's literally the Fed's job, is to manipulate the money. We know they're super corrupt. They bail out banks, but they don't bail out everybody else. And inflation, as we learned, like, we have just come to accept that inflation just is, and that inflation has to be. But we never really question, like, what it is. Like, what is the truth of inflation? I mean, inflation is essentially stealing from us, like, legally out in the open a little bit. But that's not the truth that's being told to us, right? So Bitcoin, on the other hand, you can always verify every transaction. It's completely transparent. It cannot be corrupted. Nobody can people could steal it, but they're stealing it out in the open. So it doesn't require trust in the government, in a bank. It is trust in math, which is math is the universe. The universe is math. So everything is known, right? And in our spiritual journey, we're also seeking truth, right? If you're in the spiritual community, you know that it's like, well, what is the truth? Like, you're looking for this spiritual truth, the truth of you, or the truth of what is the universe, who is God, who am I, those sorts of things, right? And Bitcoin itself just is. It is what it says it is. It's just truth, right? So when you bring this into manifestation, for you to manifest, you have to be in alignment with yourself and your highest potential. For you to be in alignment with your highest potential, you have to be living your truth. And I know that personally for me, the way that I kind of bring this back to Bitcoin is, if you know the truth of how your money is working, and that it's, how do I say this nicely, or not nicely, but like, if you know that your money is doing harm to society, doing harm to others, but you continue to go down that path, like, is that your truth? Are you in alignment with your truth and what you want in the world? So you definitely have to get in alignment your truth when it comes to money and wealth and all the financial systems. And then, so there's a thing that happens. This was a big one for me that happened kind of around February or March-ish, kind of. So if we go back to thinking about inflation again, right? So we know that our money is being debased every year. So if today $1 is going to give, we're going to be able to purchase less with that $1 tomorrow than today, then what are you going to do with that dollar? This is a question I'm asking.
You're going to spend it.
Yes.
And what is essential part of the whole system is that people need to spend their money and not save it.
Yes. Yes. So what happens if the value of that dollar will be more tomorrow than today? What are you going to do?
Save it.
Yeah. So the current system incentivizes instant gratification. Oh, well, my money's going to be worth less tomorrow, so I better buy as much stuff as I can right now. And okay, I want that new iPhone. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it now. I'm not gonna wait.
On credit.
Yeah. So what's kind of happened for me, I noticed, is that when I started to realize that the value of my money is going to be significantly more tomorrow than it is today, all of a sudden you start questioning, well, do I really need that new computer right now, or can I wait? Like, should I buy the new car now, or can it wait? And instead of being materialistic, you're now spending in alignment with what really matters to you, because you would rather exchange that money for the thing that you want, rather than, well, I just want to spend as much money as I can, and I'm just collecting things that I don't even know what I'm going to do with. They add no value to my life, whatever. So when you kind of apply that to your whole life, well, now you're practicing delayed gratification, and you're starting to value quality over quantity in your life, and you're thinking more long term in general, rather than, you know, the short term, whatever I can get right now. So you start to value freedom over being famous on Instagram, and your own peace over performance, truth over trends. I like that. And the system definitely has been designed to keep you insecure, right? It wants to keep you spending money for sure. So this is Seb in his podcast with I forget the guy, but anyways, here's a quick clip about him talking about this.
Because all of a sudden our time preference starts to shift towards the low end of things, where we're thinking long term. We're thinking about what actually motivates us and how do we build prosperity. And we're willing to do things that may be painful or hard to do in the moment, but in the long term, it benefits us. And so I'm sure, like, first to flip this question around on you, since going down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, Preston, how do you think your time preference has shifted?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, I remember what it was like prior to Bitcoin, where you're totally caught up in this consumerism of you have to spend it as fast as you possibly can. It's very hard to save. And if you could save, if you did have any disposable income in and you did save, the return rate was so minuscule for most things that you could invest in that it was just really frustrating and hard and difficult, because you were just treading water with the debasement rate, really. Mm-hmm. And whether you knew that or not, you felt it. I think that's the thing that a lot of people might not be able to quantify, why they were just treading water with the debasement rate, but they could feel it and they could just sense that they weren't getting ahead. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's just caught up in consumerism. But I want to hit on this quote that you just said, like very casually said, as we become more fearful, our awareness narrows. I think this is like really profound. I love reading some of these books like The Secret and other things. And a lot of these books profess that, you know, at the core of what you are as a human and in your soul is this idea of awareness. And so when I hear you say something like, as we become more fearful, our awareness narrows or the aperture gets tighter, but it's the exact opposite. If you're able to remove that fear, and if you're living in this world where your money becomes more valuable, or let's just frame it this way, it actually retains the buying power and the energy that you expended. We'll just say that. All of a sudden, you don't have to be fearful that it's going to be stolen from you tomorrow, and your awareness and your aperture opens up. And you're now aware of more, and you're able to assess your environment more. You're able to understand your environment and operate inside your environment more effectively, I think is probably the best way to say it. So I want you to expound on this idea of, as we become more fearful, our awareness narrows, and then the contra to that.
To start, I would say that this is.
Well, if you want to hear the rest, you can listen to the podcast. But the whole podcast was quite fascinating. They touched a lot on psychology, the psychology part. So I highly recommend it. Well, what one thing that I want to clarify, in which I actually think that it, and I'm not saying specifically that has to do with Bitcoin, but it does have to do with your Bitcoin journey. So along your Bitcoin journey, you learned that the Bitcoin purchasing power will increase over time, while your US dollar purchasing power will decrease over time. And so you did make decisions about your finances based on those two truths. But when you realize that your Social Security is being paid in US dollars, when you learned that truth, right, you made the decision, I'm going to spend those US dollars now rather than later, so that I can actually save my Bitcoin so that I don't have to spend that, so that I can spend that in the future and not spend it now. I'm not saying that that having Bitcoin means you never spend money. This is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it changes how you think about spending. Instead of buying things that you don't want or don't need, you are spending more money on things that you really value. So another key element of Bitcoin is sovereignty. Now, some of you are perhaps a little bit more on that sovereignty train than others at the current moment. But again, it is part of the journey. It's part of the path, is moving from I trust somebody else with my money to I trust myself with my money. And there's kind of a continuum there. So that is spiritual growth of reclaiming your power, is spiritual growth. So with Bitcoin, right, there's no government that owns it, no bank that controls it. I mean, you can give your Bitcoin to the government or the bank if you want, right? But that's your choice. You can have self-custody over your own financial assets. I don't have to ask any permission to do that. I don't have to, there's some small fee in the fee of transferring it, but for the most part, it's very low fee. You don't say, oh, I need PayPal to be the intermediary between this transaction, or I need to wire money and then it's gonna like sit there somewhere for a while or whatever. So nobody controls it. Everybody decentrally contributes to it. So if I'm sending Bitcoin for it to get recorded as a transaction, a miner will record the transaction, but it costs them energy to do that. And so they take a cut, but it's small. It's like 5 cents, it's a very, very small fee compared to what others pay. But it basically incentivizes anyone who wants to mine Bitcoin to mine Bitcoin, and then they get paid for that work that they do. And so that actually writes the transaction and puts it on the blockchain. Just trusted, an exchange with my money, and I'm like, well, it's mine, but I'm letting somebody else hold it because I did not trust myself to do things right. I don't know. And it really took a lot of looking inward about why I didn't trust myself, how I could trust myself, how I could move from this, I don't know, somebody else must know these things better than me, than me, to being like, no, I can do this. I can educate myself. I can own this. I have computers in my house that I take care of. I take care of a cat. It's like, I'm a responsible person. And how can I also take ownership of my wealth? And that process felt like a very spiritual journey for me. And to now be in the place where essentially I have like complete custody over all of my assets. And when you do that, it does something. It does something inside you. I a little bit jumped into the deep end, but also I figured it out. And I'm so glad that I did, because, every financial advisor I talked to also said, oh, Bitcoin? Yeah, I don't know. I would sell that. I would sell that. And I'm so glad that I finally trusted myself. And I think that's been like really part of my spiritual journey, of really just learning that I can trust myself. That's been huge for me. One of the biggest registered investment advisory firms in the country just released this white paper that said there's the death of the 60-40 portfolio, and recommending a Bitcoin allocation of 10 to 40% of your portfolio, 10% Bitcoin for conservative investors. There wasn't ever an official recommendation. This is like the first official recommendation. But the reason that he says that also is that if you look at the all of the wealth in the world right now, and you look at what portion of that is cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, 3% of all of the wealth, if you were just a passive investor buying an index fund of all the wealth in the world, 3% of that would still be Bitcoin. So he's saying if you exclusively, intentionally do not have any Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency exposure in your portfolio, you are actually betting against the market. So even at a very, very, very minimum, he's saying you should have at least 3%, because that would be equal to the market currently. Anything less than 3% is you're basically shorting Bitcoin. The very, very simple explanation of shorting is basically you're buying something and saying, well, if it goes down, then I make money. It's kind of complicated, sort of complicated, but essentially you're saying, I am betting that this will go down. If it goes down to this level, then I make money. Yeah. So I think that this is one way when you take reclamation over your finances and your wealth, you're going to care more about it as well. Rather than somebody else managing it, you're just not even thinking about it. So when you're managing it, you care about it, and then you end up sending your resources in alignment with your values. So now you're energetically putting more energy towards your values in the world. And this also goes nice into our next slide. So for women who have historically been excluded from all financial systems forever, this reclamation of your power is even more transformative. And I will show you why. There are many women in countries around the world who still have no power. They can't own bank accounts. They can't own property. They can't inherit property. And Bitcoin completely changes this for them immediately, without the government's permission, without their husband's permission, without anyone's permission. So with Bitcoin, then they can earn money. They can store that money themselves on their own. Nobody needs to know about it. They can then pay money to people. They can pay employees. They can pay they can take money from customers and do refund. Like they can do everything. They can own accounts, right? Many women aren't allowed to have bank accounts, or people, not just women, but many people cannot even own bank accounts. They can't own bank accounts that have US dollars in a country where their currencies are declining rapidly, like Argentina or Turkey. If they store money in their local bank accounts, their money just disappears. And so it's almost a necessity for them to have a place to store their wealth where it does not immediately lose value. You can create an account you can create a Bitcoin wallet without owning any money. You don't need to have money existing. You just have to earn money and say, I would like to give you a massage, and in exchange, here's my Bitcoin address. You can send me some money. It's really interesting because we don't need it as badly. And when you are more desperate, you will figure it out. And so if you're not allowed to have a bank account, you're not allowed to have money, and somebody is like, oh, there's a way that you can do it, let me show you, you're gonna really pay attention. There's this group, Bitcoin Data or Bitcoin Data, I'm not really sure how to say it, but they're a group that is a safe space for African women to learn about Bitcoin. And they do classes, they teach women how to set up accounts, and there's like all these testimonials about how it's changed their lives, and it's very heartwarming. Yeah, there's a couple of other articles. Let's see. So there's also young women in Afghanistan who can't have bank accounts, so they have set up, different nonprofits have been set up to help teach women how to set up a Bitcoin account, how they can start storing their own money. Also, I've seen some people Bitcoiners who have Bitcoin, who you can then donate to these young women's. You could donate $10 of Bitcoin to all of their different accounts just to sort of start seeding their accounts. $10 would go pretty far. So you can read that, but with power comes responsibility. So Bitcoin in the blockchain, it has power because it has the power to financially empower so many women who have no power right now. So there's also been individuals who've faced political oppression and they get debanked, and debanked essentially means the government seizes their accounts or seizes their bank or their assets so that they're not able to move or conduct business, because now they have no money and no way to store. And so Bitcoin has been a way for the politically oppressed to continue to have freedom. So there's lots of stories like this. I think it's easy to forget because we live in the US and we're, so privileged, that there's a lot of people around the world who don't have the same privileges that we do in the United States. And that this is a tool that's helping people around the world that don't really have a lot of other options. Hodling as a spiritual practice. I know it sounds a little silly, but it takes discipline, it takes faith. You have to be emotionally balanced. Your nervous system needs to be balanced to be able to ride these waves. And you need to also not have an attachment to a specific outcome, like a specific outcome on a certain timeline. That when you just have conviction, you have faith, you don't question it. You just stay steadfast and you say, I don't care about these little price movements up and down. Like, I don't care if, this thing doesn't happen, but you're just committed to the principles of the Bitcoin journey. And when I say like have belief or faith or conviction, I definitely don't mean blind faith. This is something that we also talk about in the Bitcoin community around like trust but verify. Like, just trust that I'm right for now, until you trust yourself, until you've verified, and then you trust it yourself, right? For anybody who's into the chakras, I just started learning about the chakras. There was a article where somebody wrote about Bitcoin and the monetary chakras and how each chakra is, or how Bitcoin relates to each chakra, which I thought was kind of interesting. But at the base, at the root chakra, that Bitcoin addresses the security needs, because your Bitcoin is secure, it's incorruptible, it can't be taken from you, it can't be, there's no scam. So it's like this base level of security. And then the sacral chakra, that it creative freedom expands as your financial control returns to yourself, right? So the taking back your financial power, that it's fueling your sacral chakra. And the solar plexus chakra, again, a little bit personal power and sovereignty. And then the heart chakra, because you're aligning with the collective good, with what's good for the world, and being in service. And when you start to think more long term, you're also thinking about how you can be in service to the world. And you're thinking abundance, nourishing abundantly. So that's all about nourishing your heart chakra. And then your throat chakra is supported by this journey, because Bitcoin is truth, and it's supporting integrity and clear expression. And your third eye chakra, because your Bitcoin journey expands to that, right? That long-term vision where the time preference gets longer. You're thinking more in the future. And then I think there was also one more, yes, and then the crown chakra, right? So then the crown chakra is like the ultimate, right? So that's like the ultimate of your spiritual journey, that you're liberated, and you're receiving your highest potential, essentially. If you go more deeply into the chakra aspect of this, like Bitcoin is supporting the balance in your chakras, whereas our current system like completely imbalances it, right? Like even at the root chakra, it's like our current system is based on instability and fear, and it's not really creating, that's that hamster wheel, right? And we've got this very capitalist society that's not based on wisdom or authentic direction, right? And so they're completely out of alignment with their heart chakra, because how can you be in alignment with your heart when you're just trying to like do whatever you can to put a roof over your head and food in your mouth, right? Like you can only think about yourself, and our entire system has also completely taken our power away, which like completely removes everything from from our what is it called? The solar plexus, right? So you're completely losing all of your power there in your solar plexus, because you're giving away your power. So yeah, everything in our system is completely imbalancing our energies. I think that the further, like the more I understand about Bitcoin, like the more I kind of think like, I don't know that this was so much like created as much as it was like humanity kind of discovered this at the right time, at the time when we needed it the most, because it's not just money, it's like freedom from the oppression that humanity has had for forever, that it gives all of us our power back to be who the people are that we want to be. And I think that deep down, everyone wants to be a good person, but they aren't able to because they're, if you are hungry, you will also steal and kill to eat,
Yeah.
And so I just think that this really is like good for the world. And we may not be able to see how much it is actually good for humanity here in the US right now, but I think it becomes a lot clearer when you look at other countries where there is like such extreme oppression, like obvious oppression. And you can see how that's giving people power back in ways they've never had it. And so I'm really intrigued to see kind of what happens in some of those other countries like Afghanistan and some of the African countries that are taking ownership of this more so than other countries out of necessity. It's like people inherently want to do good in the world. So our last slide, I wanted to end on the manifestation side, because this is also something that I think about a lot and people ask me about, like, well, how do you manifest things that you want in your life? How do you manifest more abundance? Like, how do you get that? And so I will leave you with 3 simple steps. One is removing the beliefs that are really holding you back, and perhaps by adopting Bitcoin, these beliefs may disappear. But there are beliefs that we hold that are automatically holding us back from abundance. Things like money always loses value. And that's understandable because money always does lose value, because the US dollar has lost value every year since 1971. So we feel that in our bodies, though. We feel that money loses value over time. And so that's the belief that we hold. But by removing that belief, which you can do, right, through educating yourself or working through and seeing that belief is not true, or beliefs like wealth equals greed. This is a big one that I see a lot, where it's like, well, if I'm spiritual or if I'm a good person, then I can't want money, or I can't want wealth for myself, that money is bad. I see people, we see people who have lots of money and that they're corrupt, and so money corrupts, right? But this is also just a belief that we're holding that is not true. And we can shift those beliefs again by seeing examples. So that goes to number 2, which is expanding what we think into who are people that do have a lot of wealth, but also are very in integrity with themselves, integrity with their values, that we see that they're doing good in the world, whatever we think good means to us. And seeing how they're embodying abundance and generosity and, ownership of their wealth. And by reading stories from those people, like Lynn Alden's book right now, and she's a very, very wealthy, intelligent, heart-centered woman, right? Who I believe is doing good in the world. So, reading stories like that can help us shift those beliefs that wealth does not equal greed, does not have to. Jack Mallers, I also really love as a good example. He's also a young person, so it helps to identify like millennials and Gen Z. I feel can really relate to him a lot more than some of the older talking heads, out there, because I think is he like 30, I think he might be 30 or 31. And I wish like every millennial watch this for sure. It was good. But yeah, he also has a different perspective also. And he doesn't really speak in a spiritual way by any means, but he does talk a lot about how Bitcoin for him is morality, that it's moral money. It's moral financial system. And so an interesting perspective, especially if you come from the belief that like wealth is greed, and here he is talking about how kind of like almost striving for that wealth is moral, or it's like taking back wealth, I suppose. So that's interesting. And then Seb Bunny, he was in that clip of the YouTube video that I shared. But he's also just like, there's a lot of just really humble early Bitcoiners who I feel like because they are really so sovereign with their finances, that they just have a very humble, very calm presence that feels very inspiring to me, at least, around I don't know, like how to do good in the world, how to do good with these tools, I suppose. I really respect that Michael Saylor is a very vocal proponent of Bitcoin, and he's sort of like, he's spreading knowledge, he's creating a system, he's creating financial systems around Bitcoin and all that. So I do really respect what he brings to the table, but I don't know that I necessarily trust him yet. I think that he may be a bit greedy. I don't know if he's greedy or if he has like a better plan for what he's acquiring. The jury is still out on that one. Whereas some of these other people on this list, like I've heard them talk, I trust my intuition, I see what they're doing in the world, and I see those as better role models. I think that if you're just starting to learn about what Bitcoin is and what it means, I think that Michael Saylor is a great educator and communicator, but I would not put him personally on a pedestal. I don't think that we need institutions and governments to accept Bitcoin for Bitcoin to succeed. I think that it speeds it up a little bit because it increases the price and it increases adoption. But I actually like kind of hold a little bit of a belief that I actually wish that it was being spread to the people at the bottom more first, because we don't need the institutions and the governments to buy it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a chicken and the egg problem, because to get the Joe Schmo involved, like you do have to have a way for them to easily do that. And so the technology needs to be built out, and we need tech to come in and like build apps and like build solutions, like build the front end of like, how do we actually use it? And for them to do that, they need to be allowed to function in the United States. Right. They need regulations to support it. And they need, they need institutional support, so it is kind of a chicken and the egg problem. But however, people in Africa and Afghanistan have figured it out, but they've figured it out of necessity, without the institutions or their country on board, for sure. So I don't think that we need them, but I think that it will, for the people where it's not as urgent of a necessity, I think that it's going to take some institutional adoption to get people on board more easily. So that brings me to my third practical step, which is taking the action. So whatever that means to you, whatever that means to somebody else. So that could be for Emma, that could be like opening an account, maybe like buying her first $500 worth or $20 worth, whatever. You know, just educating yourself, setting up a recurring purchase, you know, just it's also it's this is why I like Bitcoin as a practice, because it's also practicing, like observing the volatility, like practicing transacting, practicing moving money. Like these are things that I've had to do, and they build character. I think. Yeah. And every little step that you take I do think, really signals to the universe that you are serious about your abundance, you're serious about what you want to create in the world, because you are actually taking action and not sitting back and letting things happen without you being here,